Thursday, May 2nd, and we've got some Chapo coming at you. On today's episode, Felix and I are joined by Riley of the Trashfuture podcast to weigh in or just examine a country somehow even more benighted than our own. I am referring, of course, to the United Kingdom. We're going to check in on things that are happening across the old pond in jolly old England. But obviously, well, first, a bit of house cleaning at the top of today's show from the Chapo Department of Corrections. The excerpt from Kristi Noem's memoir in which she describes her father feeding a cat to an old crippled man. That is, in fact, not from Kristi Noem's memoir, but Jerry Falwell's. Got a little too over my skis on that one. Didn't read close enough, so I will be docking my pay for this month for that egregious bungle. So now that we've got that out of the way, obviously we are going to talk to Riley about the UK, but obviously at the forefront of my mind, and I'm sure all of your minds right now in the United States, is the scenes that we saw coming out of Columbia and UCLA and hundreds of other campuses over the last couple of days, and the really shocking, violent repression of student protests for Palestine. And I guess I'll just begin here on the Upper West Side in Columbia. And, the images I saw on Tuesday night were probably the biggest mobilization of the NYPD that I've ever seen in my life outside of maybe 9/11. And the mobilization included the NYPD's counterterrorism task force, their tanks, their LRADs. They brought out everything for this. And to me, it's just so indicative of that is the level of response when you sit on a lawn in tents, or when you trespass in a building at the university you attend. And then across the country in UCLA, we saw a night in which the administration and the LAPD allowed gangs of feral Israelis and neo-Nazi hooligans to beat women, shoot fireworks at protesters, and just generally violently assault the encampment at UCLA, followed by last night of the LAPD taking their turn doing the same thing, including shooting rubber bullets out of shotguns into the heads of students.
I want to say one thing about the UCLA stuff. Did you see this was before they sent in a brigade of guys who follow women home from Target? This was the night before. Zionist counter protesters released a bunch of poisoned mice, and I thought, isn't that kind of crazy to do if you're Jewish? Isn't that you might as well just sacrifice an actual Christian baby?
Yeah.
Come on. Come on.
I mean, Felix, I've had a similar thought where some of these, the tactics or, things yelled by some of these counter protesters, it makes me wonder if this is self-aware enough to be a calculated sort of strategy to do something that, when is described by other people who are appalled by it, sounds anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
because when you say that the Zionist protesters threw mice at us, that they
poisoned mice. Poisoned mice. Even me, I would be like, "What are you? Hey, what are you talking about, buddy? Are you Polish? What do you mean by that?"
Well,
but no.
But Felix, to your point, I think you put it quite well the other night. Is that obviously none of these protesters need advice from us. They're doing the thing, and they're doing it well. And I just simply have to, at the beginning of the show, express nothing but my admiration for their courage and tenacity in the face of, like I said, this violent repression of freedom of speech and conscience in this country. But that being said, I think you should keep in mind that today at UCLA, people are back, and there are even more people out there. And the reason that our government, the police, and these university administrators will allow, like I said, gangs of feral Zionists to beat up women is because that's the only way they can get these people to leave. They can't turn out these numbers.
Yeah,
they have nothing. They have nothing. And what I'll say here, and again, this is not to offer advice from the sidelines or anything, but I think everyone should just keep in mind when it comes to these acts of resistance or solidarity with Palestine, with this current movement against war, all you have to do is keep showing up and keep voicing in public your dissent from the project of Zionism and imperialism, to just simply say in public with other people who agree, people of conscience who think as you do, no, I'm not going along with this. We don't stand for this. We demand an end to this. That's all you have to do. And every single time you do that and continue to do that, in the face of being told, oh, this is all hateful, or this is all deeply mistaken, or actually I agree with your cause, but in fact I think you're actually harming it by breaking a window. I think you need to keep in mind that every time you do that, you ratchet up the pressure on the rotten edifice that is supporting all of this immeasurably. And you see in the absurdly disproportionate response and crackdown on this, I think you see how weak that edifice actually is. And I think you should just take strength and encouragement from the people who are continue to turn out in even greater numbers to both protect these students from violent retaliation from vigilantes and the state itself, but just simply to give voice to the conscience of humanity in public. We are seeing the lengths to which our own government and the institutions that serve it will go to stop you from doing that. But it's very easy to continue to do. And every time you do it, like I said, you may feel like you're going crazy. I think we all feel that right now, the way this is being covered in the media. You may feel like you're going crazy, but I guarantee you, your enemy is going even more insane right now.
100%. Just like Will said, I can offer, no meaningful advice or suggestions from the sidelines that, aren't already being done. Again, we cannot say enough how impressed we've been by everything from these protests, all of them. But it's not easy to face down like a American Fry Corps, but they are absolutely dog shit terrified of all of this. And if you feel any wavering or any doubt, you should feel content in that, to know that you are doing something very right.
Let me bring in Riley here. First of all, Riley, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Riley, you're an expat living across the pond, and I guess I'll start by asking you, first of all, how is this being received in the UK? Obviously, the UK government just about as complicit as our own in the ongoing horrors in Palestine. But how do the British people? How do you what have you seen in the UK, and how is the UK government and sort of, I don't know, other institutions, be it the media or academia, responding to what they're seeing in the United States?
So just to start, number one, echoing what you said, there's an enormous amount of hundreds of thousands of people weekly turning out to as you say, express revulsion and a sense of common humanity against what's going on in Gaza. And but specifically to react to the protests in America, I would say the main emotion that is being expressed by Daily Mail hacks is a combination of horny anger, where it's you get splashed these pictures of mostly female protesters getting arrested by tacked up cops or whatever, and then the headline underneath is the Met could learn a thing or two from the woke Met could learn a thing or two from American policing. It's one of the things we're going to talk a lot about how Britain is pretty terminally fucked up, and one of these, but some of Britain's institutional strangeness ends up in odd places. Ministers day in day out will say the Metropolitan Police, the sort of Greater London Police, basically for non-British listeners, they're woke, they're Hamas, they're gender, all this stuff, because they won't crack heads when ministers tell them to. Seriously. And it's the other thing is
the Met Police are doing drag. It's like Panto, they're doing Benny Hill stuff.
Yeah, we can't get the dame in the car. But right, so there's this
Dame
refrain.
Edna has been compromised to a permanent end.
She has the one gun under her giant dress. So basically, right, the Met Police is an incredible. You just see how they policed a lot of the protests for Sarah Everard, a woman who was sexually assaulted and murdered by an off-duty police officer. Right, there were protests of women throughout a lot of everybody, but lots of women throughout London, right, being you have to reform. You knew this guy was in your ranks, you did nothing, and there was an extremely heavy-handed response. But when ministers say to the police, you have to get these Palestine protesters off the streets because again, for the same reason that it's what. Oh my God! The protesters at Columbia are disrupting Vegan Mondays, which we used to hate, but now must defend.
Yeah. These protesters are stopping these kids from going to class to be indoctrinated by wokeness. Get them back in there.
That hair's turquoise at best. So basically, right, the ministers will say, I criticize the Met for not doing, like, there was a story recently where this guy from the campaign against anti-Semitism of the Community Security Trust, one of these two organizations, which is like quite like politicized right-wing Jewish community organizations, went to a Palestine march and was like trying to start shit with people. A police officer went over to him and was like, hey, please don't do that. And then he was like, oh, are you saying I can't walk here because I'm Jewish? And then the police officer was like the one guy who like misspoke and was like, yes, please just go over with the other counter protesters, tried to create a news cycle out of it. People were like, Mark Rowley, commissioner of the Met Police, you must resign. But basically they're like, no, we won't get more heavy handed on these protests. We won't like just apologize to people who are just basically like trying to start shit and demanding apologies. And we won't criminalize from the river to the sea as a chant. We would love to do that, but because you've told us to do it, now we won't, because they're very obstinate.
Damn. I didn't. How do we get our cops to be like that? I think it's just like taking away their guns.
Yeah, they stop. So basically, like, there's this thing where, and again, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but there's this thing where cops in Britain are supposed to be operationally independent of the government, like, and it's not so much that they're very much not progressive, like the Sarah Everard thing I mentioned. They're not progressive. What they are is petty. Basically.
Right. No, that's what I mean. I don't think this is like an idealized like system of policing, but if they were just reactive enough to find Zionists annoying, everything would be so much better.
The other thing as well, right, is that you guys have these sort of deputized like frat boy Freikorps, and just as a kind of aside, right, like TF it's a podcast that is mostly about like business and finance and the sort of excesses of those things and how their sort of hypes come into contact with reality. Because we live in Britain, we kind of get bounced into talking about British stuff when it happens. So we've been talking about like Bill Ackman for ages. And Bill Ackman, I don't know if you saw this, he like donated a pretty considerable sum of money to like subsidize the frat boys who went in to throw them a big like beer party.
Oh, did you read the body text for that GoFundMe, by the way?
Yeah.
It's like, it's the style of writing that people made in like October 2016, back when there were still blogs, and there were blog posts that were like, Hillary is officially out of fucks to give. See, it was the most obnoxious glazing I have ever read.
I read it like even earlier internet. I read it like a Maddox blog post.
It was a little bit of Zionist Maddox.
If only, huh? But we have our own version of that, and it's guys who are so into Britain that so there's this phenomenon that's occurred like since the BLM protests in the UK in 2020. There's this phenomenon that like a mass psychosis among people who live in like the home counties, which is like our version of like the tri-state area, I guess. There's this mass psychosis that, again, these same like gender Hamas is going to come and fuck with different like statues, specifically the World War I memorial in central London. It's specifically that
Not
one.
The cenotaph.
The cenotaph. They're very concerned about the cenotaph. And so like guys will just, and it will be like figures like guys like Tommy Robinson, who are sort of, or people associated with Britain First, like various sort of like parties that like fascist parties that keep getting banned. And then they come up as, oh, it's not Britain First anymore. It's Britain Number One. It's not the National Front. It's the Front National, stuff like that.
Yeah.
They'll keep like putting out calls on Telegram. That's like, oh, they're coming to give the cenotaph a pronoun. And then like guys like carbon copies of the same guy. And usually it's through stuff like certain football team fandoms, for example, will be like quite right wing, or just like guys who are uniformly coked out of their fucking minds, who will then descend on central London waiting for like the wave of blue haired protesters who they both fear and despise. And then they don't come. They just start fighting with the police like every time. It's happened like 3 times in the last year that like thousands of guys will descend on Whitehall, which is like our Pennsylvania Avenue. And then just when no one shows up to deface the statue, they will just get high, fight each other and the police. But these are the guys, right? I was mentioning this to you before the show, right? Which is there's been this recent, in addition to all the Palestine solidarity protests, there's been a recent change in the law allowing basically, and this was, by the way, to win like local elections that the Tories have brought this forward. So Rishi Sunak government always had this plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda to have their claims dealt with, right? It's like if you come here, you claim asylum, and you get deported, we don't deport you just to France, we deport you to Rwanda. And like that's a human rights law. It's like, well, hang on a sec, you can't deport someone to an unsafe country. So British Parliament passed a law declaring Rwanda safe, being like, okay, we can now do this because it's legally safe.
Why Rwanda though? Like, is the Rwandan government just getting a check from the UK okay? Is that
Yes.
they're just being bought off essentially?
Yes, they're being paid.
To what? Just
huge amounts of money.
house people that are deported because like who are coming from countries other than Rwanda, presumably.
Yes, yeah. It's like
that's how most immigration deals work, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just like, whatever host country gets like either discounted defense hardware or just cash payouts.
So basically, right, they have this long-standing plan of trying to just make this happen. Again, the fig leaf reason is like, oh, it's too nice over here in Britain, so people are willing to risk their lives in the Channel crossing. We have to make it even more dangerous. We have to make it even worse here, so people don't risk their lives in the Channel. We have to make Britain less appealing, basically.
Okay, well, mission accomplished. And I honestly, I see a flaw in this thinking here because I'm not so sure that Great Britain is a nicer place to live than Rwanda.
well, I mean, especially recently. But so as the idea here, right, is have a really quite intense, right, penalty basically for being an asylum seeker. And so anyone who's going to a routine as like appointment as an asylum seeker can be summarily deported to Rwanda now. And they brought this forward, this policy, by several months because today in Britain were the elections as like local councils, which is like bins and stuff. Basically, they brought forward the sort of kidnapping people's friends and neighbors policy to win the bin election.
It's bin night.
Yeah, that's right. And so what's happened then is this is not new, right? This happened in the past where when the Home Office sends a van, because again, no one has guns, right? They send a van to like basically kidnap someone and take them away. People from the area will usually go and sit in front of the van until they just let the person go. And in a world of like an increasing willingness of like political and media elites to just be like, basically to just encourage stochastic violence, this is not just like Palestine solidarity protests, but also like actions to stop deportations. These are also groups of people in the street. You know, they're already, right, these like James Cleverly, the head of the Tory party right now, like not the prime minister, like the party leader, not the prime minister, is already saying like, hey, these people like need to be dealt with, basically. So it's that kind of Freikorps is like the people who will do it are here. They're willing to like get fighty, basically, and they're willing to go places where they need to go to fight the cause of like English nationalism, basically, of which getting rid of them, capital T, is like the main activity.
Does the UK like have fraternities, or is this work mostly being done by, like, as you said, the fans of football clubs and like, I don't know, the equivalent on sort of exclusive elite academic supper clubs where everyone spanks each other or like, fucks a pig or something like that?
No, so the former do a lot of the punching. The latter, they write the articles and the policies that encourage the punching.
Okay.
They would never they would never sully themselves. They would never get on the streets and start fighting. We don't have like a Savile Row riot here. That would be considered unseemly.
I want to return to something you said earlier about how the Daily Mail and the British tabs are responding to this, which is like as you described, a mix of sort of angry horniness about these saucy birds protesting for Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
I find that interesting because over the last couple of days here in the United States, I've seen the the pro-Israel side take the opposite tack. For instance, Megyn Kelly on Fox made a big deal out of how, quote, homely she found the protesters, and they're trying to make a big deal about how ugly and unfuckable the protesters are, at least in the United States.
I really legitimately want to know, why are all the protesters so homely? I don't think they're unconnected. I'm not going to lie. I think attractive, smart people are not drawn to this nonsense. They're living their lives being successful.
Well, what can I say, Megan? You know, it's just rate this protester a 10 out of 10 smoke show or a dog. A go.
Yeah, we had to get Barstool on the case.
Yeah. But okay, drilling down into the specifics of so things going on in the UK, and I'd like to take sort of like a more like view from 10,000 feet in a second. But I want to drill down into one case of political corruption that you shared with me that I think is sort of illustrative of a lot of the kind of small bore corruption and pettiness that you're describing in the current British state. And it is the story of MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton.
I love this guy.
Yeah, there's some really funny things in this story, but can you attempt to to narrate for us the saga of Scott Benton and a conversation that he had recorded in a hotel?
Listeners of TF may be familiar with this because I love Scott I fell in love with Scott Benton, like the rest of the nation did, just late last year. Like with so many things in British politics, like there is sort of one layer of nonsense that's explained by several layers of things going quite badly wrong. And in 2019, right, when sort of the Conservative Party kind of took over a lot of former Labour heartlands, I'll do sort of, just in case like some listeners like might not know sort of how the parliamentary system works. Constituencies send MPs to Parliament. The most number of MPs in Parliament picks the Prime Minister. And most constituencies, most of the time, will vote kind of the same way, sort of like a state. And so there will be like quite dependably like Labour constituencies, quite dependably Tory constituencies, and like a few diseased Lib Dem constituencies. So when a lot of and the way that you get up, that you crawl up the greasy pole of the parties is you first have to run in seats where you stand no chance at all, right? You have to go basically get humiliated with like 2% of the vote in a place that hasn't voted for your party in 100 years, like knock on doors and get like spit on and stuff, right? In 2019, because a lot of those old constituencies flipped, a lot of gigantic fucking weirdos and like your average British politician is very stupid and very unsuited to the job. People who by that standard were very stupid and very unsuited to the job all like just got swept into power. This guy was one of them. And so Scott Benton, this MP, right? He does what a lot of British politicians do, and he says, "Well, I'm in the role, time to make it work for me." And basically, in one of like the few useful pieces of British journalism ever done, he was contacted along with a number of other MPs by a couple of Times reporters who claimed to like be helping an investment fund invest in the gambling industry in the UK. You know, gambling in the UK has been like bipartisan. Everyone fucking loves it. Like Tony Blair wanted to build
Going down to the bookies to have a little flutter. They love it. Ladbrokes. This gambling is
everyone
everywhere. Yeah.
They love Ladbrokes. They love Paddy Power. They're crazy about it. Tony Blair wanted to build a mega casino that would be rival any in Las Vegas on Greenwich Peninsula in the late 2000s after like the big Millennium Dome stopped being useful. He wanted to turn it into just a casino. And
that's literally a joke from The Simpsons.
Yeah, he
wanted the cocktail waitresses. They're straight from the shores of Essex. They are, Governor.
And the only thing that stopped it was that Gordon Brown was such a dour Presbyterian. He was like, "There will be no fun in London." It's like the same thing about the police being like operationally independent and so unwilling to do what ministers ask. It's like different kinds of misery collided with each other and stopped each other from happening. But gambling is like this huge thing. Like the gambling lobby is fucking everywhere. Like everybody's on side. Everyone's bought and paid for. And so Benton, like he gets called by these Times journalists. They're like, "Hey, we have a job. We'd like to offer you a second job unrelated to your MP work. And that second job is going to be lobbying for us." And is like, "Can you tell us what you can do for us as a lobbyist?" And he's like, "All right, I'll come meet you. Obviously, my salary is, well, I'll say the salary at the end." And he's like, "Okay, here's what I can do for you. I could leak you forthcoming white papers on gambling reforms before they go public. If you could write the questions I'm going to ask in Parliament for me, go ahead. Easy. And like actually, MPs do this all the time. If you take me out to dinner, I'll write a question for you. He literally was like, MPs who accept hospitality, they give questions all the time. I can call in favors from colleagues. I could host you a dinner at the House of Commons. And like, I don't mind like waiting outside a relevant minister's office because like we're in the same building to like badge them. I will be your man, basically.
I will question for money.
Yeah, and it's like because that's like how debate. That's how like a lot of like amendments tend to happen as well. That's how you can at least steer politics with these like formally asked, tabled questions in Parliament. And so he's like, so there's a huge scandal of like cash for questions. Like it was a big thing. It was a few years ago. So anyway. He's like, all right, all that is yours for £2,000 a month.
£2,000 a month?
That is literally, that's what like a Patreon that is all the subscribers are just people who feel bad for the purveyor. That's what they get.
Yeah.
That
like,
sucks, man.
Pay my rent and bills in a house share and I'm yours.
Yeah. But Riley, my favorite part of this story was this is when Benson was called out on this. I love the excuse he used was that the hotel that they met in was really loud and he couldn't hear them. But on the recording, there is a recording of him thanking the reporters for choosing the Pleasant Hotel, saying of it, "It's quite quiet here, and you're close to the Commons as well."
Even if he didn't say that, like, how is that a good excuse? like, it was. What did he think was being negotiated in that case? Like, was it like? Oh, I thought I was accepting like a landscaping job. I was going to clean the gutters at this guy's house.
Kind of like you're not a million miles off. He was like, oh. When I said I could get them any policies 48 hours in advance of them being released, I meant 48 hours after.
They can read about it in the newspaper for $2,000 a month.
The quote here is, I was actually offering advance site 48 hours after publication. So awesome. And then this is I love this guy because he's like, he clearly had a set of expectations about what being a British politician entailed, and those expectations don't come from nowhere. He was just 5% too stupid to do it exactly right. That's it.
I love the idea that he like the above board explanation is basically like he's a researcher for a podcast. I'll read whatever articles you want me to. I'll offer you summaries. I could just copy paste the whole thing if you want. Whatever.
It says in his letter on appeal, he said, in a democracy, is it not imperative for parliamentarians to have the freedom to engage in private conversations and express their views openly? Because in this case, his view was, I would like to trade privileges of my position to the gambling industry for money. That is my opinion, and I am protected by free speech.
It's my opinion.
You would be in this country, buddy.
It's my opinion that I would like to be the only member of British Parliament who's leasing a Jeep Trackhawk. That's the only thing I can think of that he could do with $2,000 a month.
I mean, this is everywhere as well. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Matt Hancock. Like, this is the guy who was health secretary during the pandemic, who it turns out gave like lucrative personal protective equipment contracts to the guy that runs the pub by his house. And it was or he's also like been implicated in like giving out favors for like a membership to like the Jockey Club. Like this is so small time.
Yeah, when he got in trouble, I could not believe just how like piddly all this shit was. It's like the first Irish people who came to America and became aldermen were dealing way higher than this. There were way more chips on the table.
You know what you can, if you as an American want to understand this, it's like, imagine if the way Donald Trump tries to pay and buy off people around him, imagine if that was like the standard, like that was the level that like most political corruption worked at. Like, there you go. If it was that across the board.
Yeah, like the equivalent of Bob Menendez getting like bars of gold is just getting like a pair of gloves signed by Andrei Arlovsky.
5 pounds off your next flutter at Ladbrokes for political corruption.
Yeah. I just, like it's so depressing to think of a corrupt member of British Parliament. He gives away like a weapons contracting deal worth like 900 million, and his prize is that he gets to fly in like one of that Irish budget airline.
Ryanair.
Ryanair.
He doesn't get a ticket in Ryanair, but he does get to take on a normal size suitcase. That's the prize.
Trust me, I know someone way high in the food chain at Ryanair.
I know I keep coming up with these other examples, but like you mentioned a weapons contract. There was this enormous our main weapons deal with the Saudis that was signed under Thatcher. She made her son be an intermediary in it, and he just made
this is the idiot that got lost in the rally race in North Africa, and they the whole country shut down. They were like, "Find Mark, we've got to find Mark!" Like right as the Falklands was happening,
we got to get our boy. But what people also don't know about him is that he tried to, when he lived in Hong Kong, he tried to get rich first before his mom just handed him 2% of an international weapons deal. He tried to get rich by inventing a new kind of shopping cart.
This one has 3 wheels. How do you innovate a shopping cart?
Well, he did because he needed to get rich off that weapons deal. I guess he didn't. Yeah. And he didn't get rich enough off the weapons deal. He tried to finance that coup in Equatorial Guinea. Anyway, I'm getting distracted by my favorite stories of British political shenanigans. There are people getting hugely rich off the British state. It's just people who are much smarter about it, not these people.
Right, and it seems like it's usually people who already have money, more or less. Yeah. It's people who have already made hundreds of millions, if not billions, off of finance or weapons contracting.
Like the dumbest guy who tried any of that was Lex Greensill. I don't know if you saw about this, but there was this firm he had called Greensill that did this thing called So that's supply chain financing. It was this thing where you could take your accounts receivable and turn them into a kind of bank for yourself as a company. And it was really useful for startups because they could be like, oh, we're not borrowing tons of money. We're just selling off all of our expected receipts to a finance partner for money now. And
it was payday loans for companies. How could it go wrong?
The fucked up thing is it didn't appear as credit on the balance sheet. It didn't appear as lending. It appeared as capex. And so you were able to look much more healthy financially than you were. I've been obsessed with Greensill for years. But what was crazy is that Lex Greensill quite reasonably saw the way to get rich in Britain is to hook your business up to the big money printer at the heart of the government. And so, David Cameron dutifully, walks him. And again, the government prints the money. You don't need supply chain financing if you're the government. But David Cameron would not stop trying to put Lex Greensill in meetings. He tried to get him to, change the way the British state procures medications for pharmacies and be he's like, I have my friend Lex Greensill riding to the rescue with supply chain finance. It's something he actually said. But it's if people would just do it because I guess David Cameron's sort of telling us to, I suppose we should. And just it kept on eating shit every time. He hit the wall when they tried to supply chain finance the army, and they were just absolutely. He's absolutely fucking not. Are you out of your mind? We print the money.
Honestly, I didn't know that. I did not know that about Lex G. I gotta say, I'm very disappointed in him, but I will still keep listening to his movie podcast.
Sea of heads at my
or corruption and just generally the hollowing out of the state by, these mice, mice eating away at it for fucking nickels. Obviously, I think people will be aware of the Thatcherite revolution in Great Britain and as it being indicative of the broader neoliberal revolution that every Western government underwent in the 70s and 80s. But I think just as important is how did the handoff of Thatcherism to Blairism and New Labour, how have those both contributed to the situation that Great Britain is experiencing today?
So basically, we'll gloss over John Major. Everyone likes to just gloss over John Major. Let's forget that guy and his weird glasses happened. But basically, right, the way I sort of have put it to you before is that Thatcher reset the way the country works to make the state to reduce the parts of the state that don't alienate and deprive people, to take away things like, anything from like food and milk for like school children to like spending on anything, basically, right? The privatizing like railways, water, all this stuff. And I say that the British state's broken in two ways. It was broken in that moment when like it stopped being designed to whatever you say the purpose of the state is or should be, or the welfare state, but it stopped being designed to give people lives that they could live, or at least insulate them from like the economic consequences of like what's going on around the globe, to give them lives that they should live, right? To give them services, whatever you want to say. She broke that down. That's a way the state is broken on purpose, right? It's a machine to do bad things now, as opposed to a machine that sometimes did good things, broadly speaking. Blair, I mean, since New Labour, right, cemented in a lot of that consensus. So, for example, under Blair, you start like spending more money on the NHS again, but a lot of the money that gets spent is to try to get private finance in. And so, an example, you had this thing called PFI, Private Finance Initiative. So, to get like new hospitals built, it would be like, oh, we're going to build all these new hospitals, but the government's we're not going to spend the money on doing it. We're going to have contractors do it. We're going to have like these are the people who are getting rich off the British state, is these like gigantic outsourcing companies like Serco, for example. So now it's not the hospital, Serco presents the hospital. And so then in these PFI contracts, like, I've seen some of them, it's like, oh yeah, to change a light bulb is £50, basically. You're not going to be able to have a functioning building.
Yeah, it's like American medical building, but for the entire function of the state.
Yeah, essentially. And the way I tend to think about it is that that system kind of works when you have lots of money from like the selling off of state assets, like council housing, for example. Like Margaret Thatcher implemented this thing called right to buy, where you could buy, if you have a house provided by the government, you could buy it for like 20% of its market value. And then what happened is there was an explosion in private landlords, a cratering in the quality of housing, and and rents spiked, and so on and so on. And like, okay, well, we're not going to build housing anymore. We are going to give people housing benefit, because the government doesn't want to be in the business of doing things. The government wants to be a contractor. It wants to be a service provider, but like in the sense that we're going to hire a housing association or like to provide housing in this area, and then we're going to have them like overseen. Right. The idea that these things were taken out of the directly in the political domain, and then under Blair, again, Blair turbocharges what started under Thatcher, pushed into things contracting with the government to give services to people, basically. Right. And this is this is everywhere. And this model of privatization is basically, okay, like water is a perfect example. Right. We have a water system. We have like reservoirs. We have sewers, and so on and so on. We are going to those are going to be sold, right? But because they are a natural monopoly, they do have to be regulated, and so we're going to create a body called Ofwat, and there are a bunch of these organizations. Ofgem for power generation.
I don't think the water monopoly should literally be called off water. we're off water. We're done with that.
Yeah, the Ofsted for education. So I'm getting ahead of myself. But basically, the idea is that these things will still be provided. They'll still be regulated. You can still depend on there being water. We're not going back to the Victorian era, but we are going to like mandate certain minimum standards. We're going to like regulate how much they can push up the bills by. And the sort of having Britain, basically, the British state becomes this thing that procures services from third parties and then regulates what those services can be, basically. And that's the thing, because it's based on so many assumptions that just do not bear out at all. That's one of the reasons that Britain basically has sick building syndrome as a country now.
Now, Riley, you mentioned sick building syndrome, and one of the examples you gave to me, and this really puts a fine point on rule Britannia, Britain rules of the world. as like the leading class of countries in the world. You provided me with an example about how hospitals are no longer treating obese patients on the second floor of a hospital because the concrete that the building is constructed out of can no longer support the weight of a large human being.
I wish I was. No, that's just one hospital. But so this is another perfect example, right, of things kind of the mechanism that was set up to be the state breaking fundamentally in the 1990s, which is there was this thing, RAC, reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, that was supposed to be like a temporary building material in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it's basically like, what if instead of concrete, you had some concrete, some rebar, and then quite a few air bubbles? And
Jesus. Yeah, what if?
Yeah, what if that? And
That's
so it's only,
by the way, that's how they constructed the World Trade Center.
yeah. And so it's only supposed to have this 50-year lifespan. And so what happens, right, when there was a government that was willing to invest and spend things and be entrepreneurial itself, not see itself as this contracting organization, is it builds the hospitals. And it's like, well, obviously we're trying to build 1 million hospitals right now to deal with the baby boom. We'll rebuild those later. I'm sure we're always going to stay a kind of entrepreneurial active state. We're not going to become some kind of contracting organization. That would be ludicrous. And so then what happens is that in the 1990s, they look at that at RAEC again, and then they're like, okay, well, we're just going to deem it safe, actually. It turns out we were wrong when we said this only had a 50-year lifespan. I think it's just fine. And then now, right, like schools are falling apart. There is a hospital, and I believe Warwickshire, that said, and this is, I quote, "Heavy patients must be treated on the ground floor because the combined weight of the patient and the equipment is too heavy to be safe above. You will fall through the floor if they operate on you, because we didn't want to replace the hospitals in the 1990s because it was not politically expedient to do so in like the 2-month time horizon that British politics operates in."
Another big example. You mentioned the privatization of water, and the knock-on effect of this currently in Great Britain is that there is shit in the water. Could you explain, like, how did the poop get in everyone's water?
Well, okay. So Thames Water was like this organization that was, again, spun out of the British state, sold to, I believe for a while, an Australian investment bank, and I believe is now, or was until recently, owned by one of the Abu Dhabi investment funds, but owned by these like consortia of investors, right? It's get purchased by these outside investors who then immediately like securitize the whole business, load it up with gigantic amounts of debt, start paying themselves huge dividends. And then, like, I don't know, I think they've paid themselves over 60 billion pounds in dividends since taking over, and then just didn't maintain it because there was no incentive to. Because the worst thing that could happen is they would get fined less than the amount of the dividends, or like maybe they might get found not fit and proper owners. But what government would be willing to do that when the pipes are working fine enough for now? Maybe by the time they'll break, there'll be another parliament in, and it won't be my problem. That's like a lot of the thinking is basically that. It also comes back to the fact that most of these people are friends. Like most of these people are pals, especially if it's like other British people that are owning it. They all go to the same parties. They went to the same school, like more than in the US. They went to the same school. They have the same social circles. Like Rishi Sunak, I can't remember, it was Allegra Stratton was the government press secretary for a while, who's married to Fraser Nelson, who's the editor-in-chief of The Spectator, who was best man at Rishi Sunak's wedding. They're all friends. So you're not going to be like, ungentlemanly about it. But in this case, outside investors take over Thames Water, stop repairing any of the pipes. The most that I say, the worst that can happen to them is fines, really. And now, like, Ofwat is saying, hey, turn off the Watt. And they're saying, look, you need to invest money to fix this stuff. And the investors are able to say, we're not going to invest the money to fix the pipes, which is like causing these like huge outflowings of raw sewage into like previously. I used to swim in like upstream in the Thames, like outside of London, obviously. You could swim in it. You can't anymore. Like the boat race, the Oxford-Cambridge boat race has to have a fucking decontamination shower at the very end of it. Like if you get like,
so if you get splashed with the water, you're being splashed with raw sewage.
Yes, you were getting splashed with raw sewage. But the shareholders said, no, we're not going to invest unless you let us double everybody's water bills. And so it's basically what's been happening is that we have been, out of God knows what percentage of every water bill that has been paid by like Thames Water bill payers has just gone into a series of like Panamanian bank accounts instead of fixing the fucking pipes. No one ever fixed them. They're still not fixed.
Ugh, it's a lot of shit and to be drinking. I gotta say. Now, Riley, you mentioned that today in the UK was like council elections. I did see right before we started recording that Boris Johnson was turned away from a polling site because he didn't have ID with him. To which I got to say, we got to end these unjust voter ID laws because, come on, who the fuck looks like Boris Johnson? Just let him vote.
I'd say they're trying to discriminate against non-white voters, and Boris Johnson is technically Turkish. But Turks are unlikely to have ID. No, but there were a bunch of Tory MPs who were like, "Oh fuck, I forgot." There was not just him; there were several others who would again like ring up their conservative, like local conservative association WhatsApp groups and be like, "Hey, can anybody give me a proxy vote? I forgot my ID."
I mean, are these just people who are so like upper crust that they don't even carry a wallet because like every room they walk into is just there's like a private club or like they just if they everything they want or need is just at their fingertips. So
is that real? Is that real or is that like something that Rick Ross said?
I think maybe
that sounds like such a Rick Ross thing. I haven't carried a wallet since 2003.
Well, it's I think the Queen doesn't have a passport, but the Queen, she definitely doesn't have a passport. She's dead.
Passport to hell.
That's right. But no, I think I see this also just as like and this even goes back a little bit to like the Scott Benton anecdote, which is these are just, they never think that the thing that they're doing is going to inconvenience them. It's like, I'm almost surprised that of the several Tory MPs who forgot to bring their IDs to vote weren't like, no. That's for like poor people. That's so they don't vote. I'm okay to vote. I'm already an MP. Like you'd think they're just 2% stupider and they'd be saying shit like that.
Speaking of upcoming elections, like there's going to be not a council election, but like Labour and the Tories are going to, and then I guess the Lib Dems, you describe England as having a 2.5 party system. But by all indications, we are now living in the rise of Keir. It's about to be Keir's England. Rishi does not look good for him. But like, what is the general outlines of the general election that the UK is about to go into?
We are about to be firmly Keir-hauled. I can tell you that. So basically, when I say we have a 2.5 party system, I'm actually referring to the SNP, the Scottish Nationalists, and just generally speaking, so many of the parties in British politics, like we have a 2-party system, but with lots of other parties that are like designed to try to influence the other two. So like we have the Tories, but we also have it used to be called we'll have something called UKIP. We had the Brexit Party. We now have Reform, which are basically just like ghosts and apparitions that are there to like chase so the Tories say, oh, we're being chased right, we need to go right or else Reform's going to take votes off us and so on. They're not real parties really. But also we have like the Lib Dems. It's the same thing with Labour, where like they were created basically as spoilers with like the Euston Manifesto and stuff to peel liberals off of Labour, right? In general, right? What people are going to have to choose between, when I talk about like Britain being broken in 2 ways, is if you want to vote for one of the major parties, can't see why you would, but if you do, then what you are essentially choosing between is people who fundamentally agree with the first way in which the country is broken, which is that they agree that the idea that the state should provide you with something like a decent and livable life is a fantasy at best or undesirable at worst. And the argument is over who is the more competent administrator of that program. And I think American listeners will be well familiar, right, with that line of reasoning from like a sort of nominally center-left party, which is, we love America, we love Britain, it's great. The sort of, rubes and sociopaths in the other party, they've been being sort of personally bad at running the show. So before doing this, actually, I looked at totted up some of the sort of key policy areas that Labor was going to be running on in the coming election, right? Because after like Liz Truss, the Tories have nothing. That's why they're doing sort of more and more performative cruelty to like migrants, trans people, other sort of accepted enemies of the British public as determined by our like gutter press. And so what Labor then kind of is more or less running on an open field in terms of things like rail transport, in terms of things like the NHS, in terms of things like workers' rights, into all of these things where the Conservatives just aren't offering another argument because they don't really have anything to say in those places that people want to hear. But like what is being offered is, I mean, it's cliched to say what's being offered is more of the same. It's astonishing how much of it is actually identical. Like the Labour's plan for rail nationalization is to continue what the Tories are doing now, but call it nationalization. I'm actually not. That is not much of an exaggeration.
So, like when Starmer is promising to renationalize the railways, what is the actual policy that's being on offer here?
I read the policy document, the white paper that they released, and basically Britain's privatized railways, like much the same as the water companies, they were sold, and funnily often to other state-run railways. like the British like railways are state-run, just not by our state. It's like the French own a huge number of like British train lines.
Who really wanted Agincourt? Who really won? Like Donnie Brasco. You know, right. my great great grandfather died at Agincourt. Who really runs the trains in this country?
But right, so the since 2014, because like it just doesn't make sense to have like a sort of privatized natural monopoly, the train companies kept failing, and so kept having to get taken into public ownership by conservative governments. And so because you might call it like minimum viable socialism, or you might minimum viable state intervention, whatever you want to call it, the Tories kept getting bounced into doing it. And so again, it's because Britain's so weird and complicated. It's like, okay, well, there's the train operating companies, and there you buy your ticket from, and you hire, like, put the livery on the train, and they like lease the trains from these things called like rolling stock companies. And the rolling stock companies, they're where like all the money gets out of the system. They're where the rent gets extracted. And so the rolling stock company might say, okay, we own this, like this train. So you Virgin Rail, like used to be Virgin Rails, now got nationalized because it failed. We will lease you a train. And then they lease them a train, and that's because there are so few of these companies, they control like most of all the trains. It's expensive to lease the trains, and so it's like the actual train operating company is basically like ticketing management, more or less. Like they're the front end, and that's the bit that's already slowly being nationalized because they keep failing, and that's the bit that Labor is promising to nationalize. They're not going to touch the actual like rent extraction rolling stock operating companies. The trains are going to stay expensive. What's going to happen is that there's something everyone's calling nationalization, that's going to be an embarrassing and costly failure. And they're saying, oh, well, it wouldn't be prudent. They said it in the document. It would be too expensive to nationalize the rolling stock companies. So instead, it's like saying it's too expensive to buy your house, so we're going to keep renting forever, basically.
Yeah.
And you know what they did promise to do, though, is they promised to have an app. So that's fun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're going to have like more. We talk about the country being broken in two ways, right? The fundamental way in which it's broken is that there's these like complex web of interdependent like lease lessors and suppliers and rent seekers all over, like parasites on like, I just want to go to Manchester. It costs £250 because like so many people have to get paid out of it. And Labor is what they're promising to do is not touch the thing that makes it cost £250, but they are saying, oh, hey, the way that this has been set up is kind of inefficient. What if you paid £250 and it was a slightly easier customer experience? Would you like to improve your experience of being rent sought, basically?
I want to talk about Keir, about the coming Starmer utopia in Great Britain. Now, I wanted to share this article that I sourced for today's episode. This is from Politico EU. This is Politico Europe. Now, this involves our former president, Obama, and soon-to-be Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And I bring this up because I have long suspected that Barack Obama, despite his conduct in office, doesn't like British people. I think he has a vendetta against British people connected to his father's experience in Kenya. And I will use this article as evidence for this. Headline: what Obama told Starmer, open up and be yourself. I think he is sabotaging.
Yeah,
Keir
that is
Starmer.
the worst.
I think this is the worst advice that you could possibly
Starmer.
give Keir Starmer.
I mean, didn't he opened up and was himself when he had that affair? When he was like Dwayne Wade. He had a break baby.
But this is from Politico. It says here, even UK Labour Party leader Keir Starmer's closest supporters had become frustrated by his inability to open up in public. But something has changed recently. This article, by the way, is from March 21st of this year. But something has changed recently, thanks to a little help from a former president. The hot favorite to become the next British prime minister has begun sharing, even allowing himself to become emotional about his late parents in a TV show. The man who urged Starmer to talk more openly is former U.S. President Barack Obama. The two were introduced through David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary and a friend of both men, who told Politico's Power Play podcast that Obama's key message to the labor leader was to be authentic. Obama's approach is always seated in authenticity, Lammy told host Anna McElvoy. We have seen Keir Starmer talking a lot more about his mother. His mother struggled terribly with illness for many, many years. His father cared for her, and talking about his backstory much more comfortably than perhaps we saw a few years ago. And I know that Obama had strong views that that's what Keir should do.
Wait, sorry. Obama invented having a political sob story? What the fuck?
Obama is like Hustlers University for shitty center-right politicians.
Yeah.
You won't hear this advice anywhere else. Talk about your parents. Talk about how sad it was when they died. Everyone feels bad for a 63-year-old who's an orphan.
He's an orphan. He's an orphan. He's like Marty Funkhauser.
I'm an orphan. Orphan? Yeah, an orphan. You're a little too old to be an orphan. No, if you don't have parents, you're an orphan. Oh, you could be 70 and be an orphan? You could be 100 and be an orphan. Oh, you can't be 100 and be an orphan. Yeah, you can.
No, this is like, are you kidding? Like, orphans have always been at the bottom of UK society. Like, you've seen Oliver Twist. This would be, to finally have an orphan prime minister, this would be like the greatest civil rights win of the country's history.
Yeah.
More authenticity, sir.
We're giving the entire country a second helping of gruel.
How can you have your authenticity if you haven't finished your meat, lad?
I love. It's like Starmer has this thing. It's again, British listeners will know exactly what I'm about to say. American listeners, you might not. Which is that he every single time he is asked about himself, or if someone says, "Hey, it seems like what you're doing is quite right wing," he will respond by always saying, "My father was a tool maker and my mother was a nurse," as though that's meant to like shut down the idea that he is secretly middle class. He's a knight. He is a knighthood.
I just want to read a little bit more from this. It says, Lammy was quoted in a recently published biography of Starmer by journalist and former labor aide Tom Baldwin as saying that the party leader got quite emotional when discussing his father with Obama. Rodney Starmer was a tool maker who was totally committed to caring for Keir's mother, Josephine, who lived with Still's disease, a rare and debilitating illness. When Starmer began discussing his father in conversations with Obama, Barack just came alive, Lammy told Baldwin. The former president's Dream from My Father bestseller from 1995, in which he discussed his relationship with his largely absent father, accelerated Obama's political rise. On hearing Starmer speak about his own paternal relationship, Obama began interrogating Keir further, Lammy said, believing that the story could become the architecture for a genuine campaign based on the sense that working people were being overlooked by the political classes.
He owned the tool company. He owned a small tool manufacturing company. Like, he didn't work at a factory.
Howard Hughes' parents owned a tool making company as well.
I've at Still's disorder. I'm still eating this order of fries.
So he says, but at the start of 2022, the labor leader began to open up with a speech outlining his vision of a new contract with the British people based on security, prosperity, and respect. My dad always felt undervalued because he worked in a factory. He felt people looked down on him, and he wasn't wrong about that, Starmer said. Starmer recently had to contend with a deep fake audio that convincingly but falsely purported to expose him abusing party staffers. So we got a new Keir. He's opened up, and like Really, like this is the guy that the Labor Party like cut their own throats to get Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters out. They cut like this is the guy that like is like the great hope for Labor.
I mean, this is so both parties basically have been kind of relentlessly cutting their own throats at one another for a couple years now. Like this is and again, it is boring to point out hypocrisy, right? But what do you think happens to trust in a political system when when you elect Starmer on basically saying, when he says, I'm going to like overhaul workers' rights in Britain, right? Like which is sorely needed because I don't know, again, we have these things where it's like much like you do in America, we'll have like two statuses of workers, gig employees and employees. A lot of actually we do have quite a few employment rights in this country, like at will employment's not really a thing. But there are lots of other ways in which that's undermined. Like that doesn't kick in for a little while. You might not get sick days right away. Again, to an American listener, that might sound like luxurious, but or even things like 0 hours contracts. Like you work at a pub, like the manager's like, okay, you have 6 hours this week. You have 8 hours next week. Hey, if you're nice to me, maybe you'll have 10 hours, right? They decide the hours every week. Like these are horribly abusive, types of contracts. Like that's one of the things he was like, I will ban these things, all of them. I will create single status for all employees and so on. Like he runs on that to become leader of the party. And then like everything else, this was like the most recent pledge he dropped was this one, right? He's saying, oh, we talked to business and they said they didn't like it, basically. So it's like, okay, well, we're not going to have fair pay agreements in all sectors. We're going to consult on a fair pay agreement in the social care sector. We're not going to have a right to switch off enshrined in law, but we are going to have a code of practice that's overseen by one of these toothless regulators. We are not going to ban 0 hours contracts, by the way. We are going to have a right to a contract reflecting a worker's like, you know what I mean, right? Like these, so to cut your throat for this guy whose main thing is to lie, like just lie repeatedly. And again, because like I mentioned earlier, these people are all friends with each other. He very rarely gets challenged on it. Like not never, but given the industrial scale of lying that has been required to basically put him in a position where he is going to get like a sort of glorious supreme leader for life Starmer margin of the House of Commons at this point on someone who's personally pretty unpopular. Like he's got a negative approval rating. And the government just has a way more negative approval rating. Putting forward a bunch of policies that nobody wants and nobody can say they chose. The fucked up thing is the same thing happened with the Tories. Everybody hates Rishi Sunak. Nobody but MPs wanted him to be the leader. They wanted Liz Truss. They wanted the fun lady.
I mean, I wanted Liz Truss. We got to bring back Truss as that is the cure for what ails Great Britain. But like, as long as we're talking about it, how about this Rishi Sunak guy? I mean, what I mean, like, you want to talk about a bungle? I mean, this guy is got loser tattooed on his forehead.
Before we get to Sunak, one of my favorite like counterfactuals to think about is if Hillary had won in 2016. And, you know, there are funny things to think about, like her collapsing and all of that. But, like, for the most part, I think it would have been, like, an unmitigated disaster. Like, she would have been a historically unpopular president to the degree or exceeding what Trump was. COVID under her would be hysterical and horrifying. But with Keir, I think we're actually going to get that. It will be the British version of if Hillary won. Like, I don't know how soon this happens, but I see him becoming enormously unpopular as prime minister within like 6 months.
Well, all it will take is one event that causes people to turn on him, right? Like one unpopular intervention, one like I'm seeing it in my mind's eye right now. Future headlines. Keir Starmer collapses at Centotaf. Hours later, I feel top notch. Look, I just want to go have a flutter down at Ladbrokes with the guys. No, but right, because the way that the British party political system works, right, is primaries tend to be combinations between party members and MPs, and like in the case of Labour, like other organizations like unions, is there's a much bigger thumb on the scale, like a direct thumb on the scale by like party elites, basically. So what we have is we actually have in Starmer running against Sunak, a guy who's like bounced into every internet culture war thing he possibly can, has this very weird off-putting presence and is 5'2". We have Hillary versus DeSantis.
Yeah,
As our
Yeah.
you know, we like Rishi Sunak he is so reactive to what he thinks like bread and butter conservatives want, and he's so surrounded by like basically think tank gripers that you want to know what a DeSantis presidency looks like, it's over here. Like, he's someone who was so like against COVID safety that before there was a vaccine, he paid people to eat in restaurants when he was the chancellor. Like, he had a thing called Eat Out to Help. If you want, I mean, he had a thing called Eat Out to Help Out.
My wife sucked off the neighbors while I was eating out to help out.
So yeah, this thing Eat Out to Help Out, where you could like claim 50% off the food bill at like participating restaurants. Only Britain could have a government program that was limited to participating restaurants, by the way.
Yeah, only England would have to pay people to eat at their fucking restaurants.
So it's this thing, right? Where in COVID, this is before any vaccines are out. No vaccines. The only way that it hasn't been like, rampage to the entire population, killing everyone. And by the way, Matt Hancock, the guy with the pub landlord, did his best to make sure that happened, because he was like, oh, we need to get beds free in the hospital. Quickly, send everyone into old age care homes. Kill all the grands.
Got that one from Cuomo.
So Rishi Sunak did this. And then, so he pays people to go to, and he says, no, you can't take food out. You have to eat in. Why? You're supporting the restaurant industry regardless of where people eat, but you had to eat in to get the discount. And so, again, this was calculated to have cost like thousands of lives.
I mean, I know very little about Rishi Sunak. I just
last thing about that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Last thing. The BBC, when they did a little info animatic about Eat Out to Help Out, literally dressed him up as Superman giving out money.
Well, like I said, I don't know much about Rishi Sunak, but I did find one story from last year that I thought was funny. It was a controversy that Rishi embroiled himself in because he gave $3 million of his own money to his wife's school in the United States, which is Claremont McKenna, which has an endowment of $1 billion. And he donated, it says here, Rishi Sunak and his wife gave $3 million to a mega rich U.S. college, while UK schools scrimp and save to afford even the basis. The absolutely staggering donation paid for a computing lab at Claremont McKenna in California, where the PM's wife, Akshata Amurthy, studied economics and French as an undergraduate. Fees are $86,000 a year for tuition and board.
Cool. Now they can play Counter-Strike 1.6.
That is like offering a tip on your electricity bill. That's like donating to like Con Ed.
I guess again, American listeners might not know this. Rishi Sunak's wife, her father started Infosys, one of the largest, most valuable companies in the world. Rishi Sunak is tremendous. Like, he is from the international non-territorial country of wealth. Like, he's from nowhere. He lives mostly in like San Francisco. He fucking hates being prime minister. You can see it. He fucking despises it. He has to like live in this ratty townhouse, which, by the way, if you're in prime minister in Downing Street, you have to furnish it yourself. If you want it repainted, you have to pay for it yourself. You have to pay for all your own food.
But the cat comes with it, though. Do you have to bring your own cat? Okay.
So he has to live in this like shitty apartment and deal with like Scott. He has to like talk to like Scott Benton, whose like eyes are unfocused and is breathing through his mouth. He fucking hates it. He wants to be in like the fucking Burning the Owl or whatever at Bohemian Grove. He knows he doesn't belong here. He just wanted to be taken seriously. Had a seat at the big boy table. But it goes back to like all of these people knowing one another, right? Because there was another sort of thing I pointed out I was thinking of saying as well, right? Just in addition to like, him being so enmeshed with certain parts of the press, it's beyond the Tories, it's beyond the press, right? the head of insight at the Tony Blair Institute, which is trying to get ID cards. Like every policy paper they write, they're like ID cards, ID cards, ID cards. They're obsessed with ID cards and getting everyone on a big computer.
What kind of like a government, like a government ID, something different than a driver's license?
Yeah, like Tony Blair loves Singapore
or a passport or whatever.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. He wants to have like the Singapore central ID system in Britain. He's been trying to do it since the 1990s. It's like it's become kind of a running gag that everything Tony Blair wants to do involves first getting everybody onto a big spreadsheet so we can decide like what to do. Like that was kind of like the sort of social theory of New Labour, was that if we know that we're beneficent, we know that we're good, but we're also smarter than everybody. All we have to do is exercise fine-grained control from the executive over more or less anything, right? They did this with the sort of like the Home Office as well, with like the visa, everything. They were like, we want to exercise fine-grained control over everything we possibly can. And in order to do, the best way to do that is going to be getting everybody onto a single database. So it's like, oh, you won't have benefits anymore. You'll have a personalized work support program, right? This was the Blairite dream. But Tony Blair has this institute called the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, where he like works with like Mohammed bin Salman. He works with like any sort of like Central Asian sort of government with dodgy human rights records you could name. He fucking loves Singapore. He cannot stop talking about how great Singapore is and how UK should be like Singapore. And the health secretary of the Labour Party, Wes Streeting, who's trying to rebuild the NHS, can't stop going to Singapore and being like, in Singapore, here, you can't, if you're fat, you can't go upstairs. And like, it takes 52 weeks to see a specialist and stuff. And, increasingly, if you have a stroke in London, the advice is you should just die because an ambulance isn't going to get to you. Like it's if you're seriously ill in some parts of the country, the advice is don't wait for an ambulance. There isn't one coming because we can't afford them. Right. That's how underfunded it is. And he goes to Singapore and he's like, every patient has an iPad. Wow. That's what the NHS should be like. This is not so much exaggeration. But so the Tony Blair Institute, right? The head of insight at the Tony Blair Institute is deputy to Starmer's campaign director, and then the husband of the head of the insight at the Tony Blair. So Mariana McFadden, head of insight at the Tony Blair Institute, deputy to Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's campaign director, who works, and then Pat McFadden, another Blair government like veteran, again works with both of them at like as Labour's campaign chief. Like these are so tied up, and at every level. Like there's this thing called a non-voter, which is like a sorry about the deluge of information. There's so much that's shit about this place. I like it. It's a great country. It's a shame about like the elites in the political system. There's this thing called a non-voter, which is a like bespoke vote counting system that local Labour Party constituencies use to like pick who's going to be the MP, like the MP primaries. And it's this software that was designed by a husband and wife team who are best friends with David Evans, the extremely right-wing general secretary of the Labour Party. And wouldn't you know it, the company is now being investigated by the Metropolitan Police Cybercrime Unit because a non-voter keeps on favoring right-wing candidates. But they're all pals. Like it's you can't. I know I keep hammering on it, but like part of understanding why this place is so broken is that the elite never changes. Like people don't fail out of it and get replaced by new people. There's no process of elite cycling. The walls around them are so high, and they defend each other to the goddamn hilt.
I think we got to leave it there for today's episode. Mm-hmm. But Riley, thank you so much for your, wonderful summation of the state of the UK today.
I didn't even get to the guy who robbed a council blind to get a local council blind, and now they can't do bin collections, but he lives in Dubai.
Yeah, I did see that story. The local council scammed out of £135 million by a businessman who fled to Dubai.
Yeah.
And now there's no bin collection. It's no more bin night. There's no more bin night on the council.
It's because they were said, hey, no more funding from the government to like cover your statutory like obligations to collect bins and provide education. Bet on the open markets. Good luck. Well, anyway, that's enough from me.
Like I said, it's a good indication of like what happens in the UK is already happening in this country as well, and sure to be exported to a nation near you soon enough. But thank you, Riley, for your tour through the UK. Like I said, a country somehow even more benighted and in a state of terminal decline than the United States. So if things seem bleak in this country today, just look to our cousins across the water. It could always be worse. Riley, thanks again for joining us. Everyone, go to subscribe to and listen to Trashfuture. Links will be available in the bio. And just as a last bit of house cleaning note, I just want to let our listeners know that we are currently working to put together an episode to feature some interviews with some of the people at the UCLA encampment as well as Columbia, perhaps the same person we interviewed earlier. But we are working together to put together a package of interviews covering the police violence and repression of these ongoing protests at universities across the country. So keep your ear to the ground for that. We should have that out in not too soon, not too long.
I don't want to be too flippant about it because we are in contact with many of these groups, but one of the difficulties is the potential interview subjects keep getting arrested, which is delaying our ability to actually talk to people as they focus on staying out of jail and keeping their encampments from being viciously attacked and overthrown. So they've got more stuff on their minds than talking to us chuckleheads, but we're working on it.
So just one last reminder, this Saturday at Littlefield in Brooklyn, please come out and watch Death Wish 3 with Hessa and I.